Hello, I'm your host Jim McClean. Welcome back to another episode of the BanterFlix movie review show here on NvTv. Let's see what movies we'll be talking about tonight. Our series of special episodes throughout July concludes as we look back at some of our favourite summer blockbusters from 1984. So that's what we've lined up for you this week. Joining me in the studio is Tim Burton.
Hello, Jim.
Tim, you would have been 8 in 1984.
Yes, 8 was a magical age, and I lived in Scotland at that time, and I used to go quite regularly with the family to this place in Aviemore in the Highlands called Santa Claus Land, and it was basically like this land that promoted Christmas and all year round, and it was really popular. It isn't anymore. It's if you go to YouTube and you'll see this kind of weird ghostly apparition of what used to be a magical place for kids, but no, for some reason it just didn't last. It didn't endure.
Who wouldn't have thought, Christmas could be every day. What's not to like about that? And you're talking about it might not be a success now in 2024. We are not in 2024, Tim, my friend. We are back in the 80s. The 84, I was 2. Well, actually, technically, I wasn't even 2. It was all downhill from here for me. This was me at my peak in the 80s, 1.5 years old. Hadn't developed my love for cinema. Just about getting walking and rambling. Just about been potty trained, I imagine. Hopefully everyone has our odd days. But, so Joe, then there's the point where we come to you. We felt obliged to have your lovely self on for a 1984 episode. Tim was 8. I was nearly 2. How old were you, my friend?
I was floating in the void of nothingness because I wasn't even born. I was about 6 years short of, 1984.
You would have loved 84. You would have loved Santa Claus Land. It would have been a wonderful place to go. But let me refresh your memories of 1984. For those who are old enough viewing at home to remember, so Thriller was the biggest album of the year. Some of the notable people that were born, unlike you, Joe, that year. So we had Mark Zuckerberg, Scarlett Johansson, Katy Perry. What a highbrow brunch that was. It might have just possibly been the first few people that came up when I Googled it. And Tim, you've already mentioned Christmas, and we will come back to this. I'm seeing a theme for your pick for this episode. We had Band-Aid. First time we had Band-Aid was released in around Christmas time. Do they know it's Christmas? But we will come back to that and the festive note for this podcast, even as we record in July when everyone's thinking about Christmas. But before we go into the movies we have picked, let's have a look at some we haven't.
I don't believe it. You hear it all over.
What a story.
What a scandal.
What a comedy.
What a tragedy.
Incredible.
I don't believe it.
How can you believe it?
What horrors have you heard?
Tell us.
Tell us.
Tell us at once.
Tell us about Wolfgang.
Amadeus.
Mozart.
Mozart.
Mozart?
Try to imagine all life as you know it stopping instantaneously and every molecule in your body exploding at the speed of light.
All right, that's bad. Okay. All right, important safety tip. Thanks, Egon.
How did you do that?
Don't know. First time. Power. Whole body. Make a perfect picture.
How do I know if my picture's the right one?
If come from inside you, always right on. Lesson about the balance, not just karate, lesson for whole life.
I'm here to help you. I'm Reese, DN 38416, assigned to protect you. You've been targeted for termination.
There is a mermaid in New York City.
How come she's got legs?
She has legs out of the water. She has fins in the water.
What about a woman showing up naked in a public place, Freddie? Well, I'm bored, of course. Can I come in?
No!
All right, let me in.
I'll be right there. I'm just changing.
That girl is a mermaid. Numbers all go to 11.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
So that's some of the movies we haven't picked. So you're all intrigued at this point. Everybody watching home's going, well, if they haven't picked the likes of The Terminator, what movies have they picked? And this is the point where I will throw up my choice first. And purely because I am a massive Trekkie, and last month it was back in cinemas and got to see it in the big screen. And the film I'm choosing for this week's special is Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. We'll play a clip in just a second to see what you think here in the studio. The second part, I think, a little perfect trilogy of movies within the Star Trek franchise, the Genesis trilogy of sorts. So we've had The Wrath of Khan, I think we can pretty much all agree, is still to date probably one of the best Star Trek movies. Then we have The Search for Spock, and then after that we have The Voyage Home. And two of those were directed by Leonard Nimoy. This was his first, and before I hear what you guys think about Search for Spock, let's have a look at the trailer.
Excelsior closing to 4,000 meters, sir.
Scotty, we'll need everything you have.
Aye, sir. Warp drive standing by.
Kirk, you do this, you'll never sit in the captain's chair again.
Warp speed.
Aye, sir.
Warp speed.
Prepare for warp speed, stand by, transwarp drive.
Transwarp at your command, sir.
Full power level.
Execute.
Full power level. Ultimate report full power.
So that's a look at Star Trek Search for Spock. As I said, it was out in cinemas last month, remastered, looking fab for its 40th anniversary. And I just want to give the film a little bit of love. I think it's often overlooked in comparison to, as I've mentioned, The Wrath of Khan, The Voyage Home. And Joe, I'll come to you first. No, you weren't born in '84. I might come back on this. Might keep kind of pulling that thread every so often during this episode. But are you a fan of this entry within the franchise?
Well, I think you're going to hold it against me, the fact that I wasn't born, but no, I did enjoy it. I'm not a massive Trekkie in terms of the original sort of cast. I'm more of a, if I like any of them, it's probably the ones from the next generation, the likes of Picard and that. But, you're coming off The Wrath of Khan with this story. What I appreciated with it is it didn't just sort of double down on everything. It didn't go for something bigger, more extravagant. It was a much more smaller personal tale, and that's what I really, really liked about it. It's a bit unusual, for this to be termed as a summer blockbuster, because when I was watching, I was like, this is a much more sort of thoughtful piece of science fiction. It does have its flaws within it, but overall I enjoyed it. And the thing that sort of kept me going throughout it, and the thing that I really loved, was James Horner's score. I thought it was just terrific. Even though when I was listening to the Klingon theme, all I could think of was the aliens, because it's practically the same sort of music throughout that. But no, I really enjoyed it, and the inclusion of Christopher Lloyd as the Klingon villain was, he's over the top, but in the best way possible. But yeah, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, he gets to spout some Klingon with gusto and glee. Yeah, he's a great villain. You want to kind of very much pantomime. You want to boo and hiss. And you've mentioned the score. The score is one of the things, because I wasn't certain when I went back to rewatch it. I knew that James Horner had done Wrath of Khan. I wasn't 100% certain he had done Search for Spock. But of course, as soon as you hear it, it's unmistakable. Great score. The one sequence in particular that really grabs me from a musical point of view is just the actual detonation sequence of the Enterprise. I'm sorry if it's a spoiler, but is it a film that is 40 years old? Just don't worry, they rebuild it. I assure you, they do rebuild the Enterprise. But that sequence is absolutely fab. And I was talking to a friend just a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about that sequence, just how it's shot and the score, just fab. Great film. And the last thing I will say, because I will wax lyrical about the film for quite some time, is it's very much an ensemble. Some actors, some of the cast are given less to do than others, but it does feel like an ensemble. But particularly for me, Defrost Kelly is given a chance to shine. What can I say? I was always a Bones fan. I was never a Kirk. I was always Bones. But Tim, what about you? Are you? I don't know. We're actually, because the last time I had you on the show, we were querying your horror credentials. I don't know. I mean, are you a Trekkie? Are you a massive fan of sci-fi?
I think there's room for both. I was involved in a concert a couple of years ago. Actually, it was called Star Trek Meets Star Wars, and the first half was music from Star Trek, second half Star Wars, and the fans all met together. There was no, there was no fights, no kind of, I'm a Jedi, you're a Trekkie, and all that.
Yeah, but the first half was better.
The problem with Star Trek is some of the films, are really inconsistent, But no, The Search for Spock, in fairness, it's a tight film. It's only 1 hour, 45 minutes, so it rattles along, good pace. The opening sequence, and I'm glad you both mentioned the music. It's a beautiful opening sequence, which obviously, yes, is a recap of Wrath of Khan, but it was actually James Horner rescored it, with some very touching, more focus on the cello, which has that wonderful kind of longing and sadness, because obviously it's very poignant. And the fact that Leonard Nimoy directed it, I suppose, makes sense because obviously Spock isn't in it that much, so that was a good, I suppose, term of events when you think of, practically speaking. But the effects are still good. ILM were behind the effects yet again, and there's that gloss to it. And this new 4K remaster is really, it glows, like it's nice. And some of the, I know Star Trek the motion picture was touched up considerably, and some things were actually reshot even digitally and enhanced. I'm not sure if that kind of effort was done for Search for Spock. I think it's more just a remaster. But some of the photography still holds up well, especially whenever, Spock's on his casket is in the grass there. The colours are very rich,
Yeah, it's a film I have to admit I had overlooked a little, and getting back to see it on the big screen last month just reminded it's like I come back to, and I know I mentioned this kind of idea of a Genesis trilogy, in the sense you have the likes of motion picture that was a film that was pulled in too many ways, very much a reaction to 2001: A Space Odyssey, and also the proposals for a new Star Trek franchise as well, new TV series that didn't ultimately come to be. Then we had Wrath of Khan, which just stupendous. Then we have, as I say, this mini little trilogy of films. We have Wrath of Khan, The New Hope, I would say. Then you've got, in Search for Spock, is of sorts The Empire Strikes Back, in the sense that we know the story has kind of moving along. It's a sequel to what I've seen before and lays the foundations for The Voyage Home, which is another one directed again by Leonard Nimoy I absolutely love. So I'm glad, just to be able to shine a little light on Search for Spock. And Tim, as you mentioned, there's a lovely new remaster that's available for people now in 2024. So if you get the opportunity, seek it out. And that's one sequel within our 84 retrospective. Joe, you've picked another. So tell our viewers what you've picked and why.
I went with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. The reason I picked this one was, growing up, I was a massive, massive Indiana Jones fan. Anytime they were on TV in the bank holiday, I would just make sure I'd run to the TV, make sure they were recorded, whatever, just to make sure I watched them. But Temple of Doom was always the one I kind of didn't really gravitate to as much. Even now I would say, Last Crusade is my favourite, but I think Raiders is the best film of the lot of them. But Temple of Doom's really grown on me over the years. I think it was the darker tone of things that really put me off as a child, but it's something that I'm sort of gravitating to more now, as you've probably seen in the last episode, with the likes of the films we were talking about then. I just think it's a fantastic little adventure. I don't think it's maybe up there overall in terms of quality with the other two in the original trilogy, but it's still, a good rip-roaring adventure.
Okay, so on that note, we'll play a clip of the film.
The old legend of the Shankara stones. The villagers' sacred rock was taken.
Village stories, Dr. Jones.
Fortune and glory, kid. Fortune and glory.
You know how to fly, don't you?
No. Do you?
So that's a clip of the Temple of Doom. Yeah, Joe, everything you've said I agree with. I have to say this is probably, well, I was going to say it was one of my favourites. I love Temple of Doom for the fact that it's dark and the fact that it scared me. And those are, when I was younger, I remember, like all the things that you said. I mean, anyone who knows me, watches the show, listens to our podcast will know I have a vivid memory going to see Ghostbusters 2. And the first Ghostbusters was out this year in '84. None of us have picked it. Ghostbusters 2, 1989, being terrified by Vigo the Carpathian. And I remember watching at home Temple of Doom and being terrified by that sequence where the villain, puts his hand, essentially grabs someone's heart, and it terrified me. And that has stayed with me, and that's always why I've had a little bit of love for Temple of Doom. I know that Last Crusade is probably, like you, it's probably my favourite just because we have just Sean Connery having an absolute blast, and Raiders of the Lost Ark is just perfect popcorn fodder. But there's something about Temple of Doom in the sense that it's going darker, it's more adult orientated. Who knew that we all wanted monkey brains? But I know ever since then I've been, sadly no restaurant in Belfast offers up such delicacies. But I think it's a really interesting choice that I think, like you've mentioned, like I've mentioned, is getting a little bit of reappraisal. I know we've had 3 pretty perfect entries within the Indiana Jones franchise, 2 questionable entries, some bit of the latter 2 better than others or have their moments. But I think this is a really interesting, solid middle chapter that we have to remember is technically a prequel because it happens before the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is always lost to me when I was watching it as younger. So Tim, you were 8. So I'm going to imagine, were you going to see Temple of Doom in the cinemas? Was it on your radar at the time?
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely, because my parents loved film, and they would have taken us, the weekends, and Temple of Doom would have been at the Odeon, and it was unforgettable. And even the opening sequence, I'll always remember as a kid that musical sequence, a kind of throwback to the Busby Berkeley glitz and glamour, and the dance routine with Kate Capshaw. It was outstanding. I mean, what a way to start a film. I mean, that's just exhibit A of Spielberg being a fantastic showman, or show person, I should say, these days. But one of the things about Temple of Doom, and this is very nerdy, and I'm sure you guys will know this, you talked about that scene, the heart being pulled out. I mean, that was for years cut over here, and the only way you could see that full scene was you had to import the American Region 1 DVD. I mean, obviously, I know we've come a long way since then. But I still think the only way to see that uncut is you have to watch the American version, or the 4K or whatever. Cause I think the BBFC still have that, because it is quite, it goes more extreme than just the heart.
It's a tough sequence.
He holds
Tim.
it up, and
it is a tough sequence, and I think still now, 40 years on, it has the power to shock. Yeah, Spielberg knows how to push the barriers on those type of sequences.
And I think out of all of Spielberg, I mean, there's so many nods of hats throughout Spielberg's career. When you think of the David Lean kind of influence, there's some lovely, the treks across India on the elephants, those epic kind of wonderful wide shots, and you've also got the likes of the battle on the bridge, which is just incredible. It isn't actually fully scored by John Williams. It's more kind of ethnic percussion, because even though it's pretty much wall-to-wall music, there are some moments where it gives a chance for us as an audience to kind of breathe. And that scene of Indy on the rope bridge, and we're not really sure if he's going to get away, is very well done. Without this bombastic music, it's very restrained.
But yes, 1984, Temple of Doom. younger viewers across the globe terrified by that film, I would say. But a great entry within the franchise, and Spielberg doing something a little bit different. And now, as we reach near the end of this episode in July, Tim, you're coming over a little bit Christmassy, because the film you've picked,
yes,
I guess now has become much more closer associated with Christmas, and that is a Joe Dante classic. Do you want to tell our viewers what you've picked and why?
Well, Gremlins is a film which, I watched for the first time, it must have been probably about, I would have been about maybe 12. It was on TV, and it freaked me out completely. I mean, especially the final kind of, voiceover when there might just be a gremlin in your house, and I was such a wuss. But I think, for that, it's so effective, because there's a final few minutes which just leaves an indelible mark on you. And Gremlins, I mean, they were pretty scary creatures, but it's a film which I think has endured because whenever you're older and you look at it with older eyes and different perspectives, you can see so much just love of cinema. I mean, Joe Dante's love of Frank Capra, of the Kingston Falls kind of being this tribute to It's a Wonderful Life, and all of these little nods a hat, and of course, the Gremlins watching Snow White in the cinema. There's a perfect love letter to cinema straight away, and yeah, it's set around Christmas, but it isn't really, apart from that, the Phoebe Cates kind of Christmas, her dad fell down the chimney, which again is such a creepy thing for a kid to hear. It's very well written. We know it's Chris Columbus. So there's so many wonderful moments in that film, and it does encompass so much. And it is, as I say, it's not just the kind of Christmas. It's set at Christmas, fine. But I think the fact that the film was released in summer is testament to that. It didn't need to be a kind of Christmassy build film, even though it has been, I suppose, over the years.
Well, it's very true. I know there's a lot of programmers, not just here in Belfast, cinema programmers, I should say, not just in Belfast, but across the globe. Will definitely, I would say, Gremlins is a festive favourite. It is a must to see. And it did feel a little bit weird watching it in July, but yeah, I mean, it's a film made by a filmmaker in Joe Dante, who knows what he's doing with horror, clearly influenced by that genre, is unafraid to have fun with it. I mean, we've seen him cut his teeth with Piranha, and he'd go on to make films like The Howling, great film. But I feel I've allowed myself to get a little bit sidetracked in all this love for all things Mogwai related. We haven't even introduced a clip for our viewers at home. So, Joe, I know you're chomping at the bit to talk about a movie that was released before you were even born. But before we do, let's have a look at Gremlins.
I hope he's housebroken.
I'll bet every kid in America would like to have one of these. They might even replace the dog as the family pet.
There's 3 rules you've got to follow. Keep him out of the light. Don't get him wet. But the most important rule, the rule you can never forget, no matter how much he cries, no matter how much he begs, never feed him after midnight.
Mom, what's going on here? There's a problem with the Mogwai.
It's going through changes. Lots of changes.
Did you feed them after midnight?
Turned to a major disaster area. Now you have got to warn people.
So that's a look at Gremlins. Tim's waxed lyrical about it. 12-year-old Tim, terrified, still not over that trauma. I was having a ball. I'm still thinking about Gremlin carol singers. Looking forward to them back hitting or knocking on the door December time. Joe, where you went on this?
Well, it's not really Christmas until your woman goes flying out the window from her stair lift. Mrs. Deagle, thank you. Yeah, that's how you know it's Christmas. No, I love Gremlins. Absolutely love it. And it's just one of those films where it's nasty and it revels in it, but it's enjoyable at the same time, because a lot of films, it tries to be nasty and revels in it, but it just ends up being a miserable watch, whereas Gremlins is the polar opposite. On paper, it really shouldn't work, but it's the skill of Joe Dante as a filmmaker that just makes it click and it makes it work. And I think even partly, I think it's the score that I realised this time, Jerry Goldsmith, because that theme for Gizmo and Mogwai in general, it just always pulls on my heartstrings. It just, like, I can hear it instantly in my head and I'm almost feeling like I'm flooding with tears. But then even the Gremlins theme themselves, like the playfulness with that there, it's just fantastic. But yeah, it's just Joe Dante just having a ball with his love of like 50s monsters films, and then just combining it with his general love of films like Tim was alluding to the likes of Frank Capra and stuff like that. And it works really, really well. And even though I was watching it with the fan on full blast, it didn't faze me at all. It's timeless. You can watch it any time of the year and really enjoy it.
I know we're going to move on and wrap up the show, but not to sound like the old man in the room, but do you think there's a sense of the practical effects in films like Gremlins? The fact we've all talked here about the timeless quality to it. Do you think it's the practical effects, the puppetry, the Jim Henson-esque worlds of this movie that gives it that timeless quality? Just, I don't know, just before we go, Joe, for you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the one thing I did really appreciate, not watching just Gremlins, but all 3D films. Like, you watch the Enterprise flying through space in Search for Spock, you know, you can tell it's a model and that there, but you appreciate it more because you can see the fine details and the artistry that went into that. And then in Temple of Doom, you have the minecart chase. You can tell, you know, there's little figurines in them rather than actors, but that doesn't matter because it's so thrilling in the way it's staged, and you can tell it's actually something moving along a track. And then obviously here with Gremlins, you know, it is puppets and stop motion, but give me that any day of the week over some CGI sludge where you're just like, oh, I feel nothing watching this. It's just weightless. Whereas films back in the 80s, those kind of effects, it gave the films more heft, even though, you know, they have aged. You know, there's no denying that there, but it's that sort of heft that they have to them that makes them more timeless in a way.
But so many in the movies from the 80s, there's that physicality, practical effects, puppetry, just a great time for cinema that I think is why so many of those films from that decade, and I know particularly we're talking about 84, are still now, 40 years on, being not just rewatched, but is finding new fans who will take those love for the films for years to come.
Back in the 80s, we have to remember that was a kind of formidable era where we had the likes of, you know, Stan Winston, Rick Baker, these Phil Tippett, these wonderful creators who, I suppose, you know, certainly cut their teeth as such on Star Wars with ILM, but then they each went their own individual way. And Stan Winston, his work on Aliens is just, it still blows my mind. You know, it's just, it's fantastic. The you know, the mother just breaking free of the, you know, the eggs and everything. And of course we know about Terminator. But then Rick Baker, like, look at Bigfoot. What an adorable, this wonderful kind of creature, not at all CGI, totally just costume and fantastic makeup. And there's Bigfoot and the Hendersons, I think it was 1987. So maybe in the future we'll do a year. I'll probably choose that. I used to adore that.
We can be the old men in the bar reminiscing about yesteryear in cinema. And that, on that note, brings this retrospective over the last 4 episodes to a close. It's been a lot of fun looking back on the various decades. We've looked from 2014 now to 1984. Who knows, next year if NvTv allows, we might do something similar again over the summer months. But all that's left for me to do now is to wrap up this week's episode and the series. So all I've got to do is thank my guests. So thank you very much, Tim.
Happy Christmas.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Happy Easter.
And we'll be back in September with a brand new series, so we won't be off your screens for too long. And of course, you can check out our entire back catalogue on YouTube. But we'll see you again in September. But for now, until then, goodbye.